Thank you for tuning into Stampscaping 101. This is a fun scene that I just did. It's kind of really about a lot of texture. In the previous video I used my bleed-proof white and old toothbrush to splatter on some paint, and that's what I wanted to do again tonight. I love doing that technique, and I love the look of it and the textures, you know, that you can kind of achieve from that kind of that random, I don't know, it's a little bit controlled, but it's somewhat of a random kind of application of a paint like that. But that is just a lot of fun to do. I kind of went overboard and I added, you know, a ton of it down. You can kind of see it misted all over. A lot of the splashes are in the design itself, in the form of this rocks and waves stamp, but, you know, it's kind of a design that's really conducive for that splatter painting technique. I went a little bit overboard, so I added these reeds in the foreground just to kind of soften up, or, you know, push back those textures a little bit visually by putting something in front of it. But nevertheless, it's a pretty active and textural piece, no doubt, from the use of all that paint splattered about. But it's a fun scene. Now, if you do something like this, if you do something with this, you know, bleed-proof white and kind of that splattery type of technique, there's different ways you can do it. If you're doing it in a scene like this, what I would recommend, though, is to retain some of that lightness in here of the waves, okay? Because if you're splattering like that white paint down here around these crashing waves like that, what you're seeing is there's a light source somewhere. It doesn't have to be, you know, in the scene either. But you want to retain some of that lightness, that white, so that it looks like it's reflecting the that white light. So when you splatter these little, you know, white little paint things everywhere, you're saying that this moisture in the air, these splashes, these little bits of water, are being illuminated by that white light. So if, in other words, if you just make everything really dark in here, that white paint will really stand out, and it might not look as integrated in terms of the lighting scheme of the scene. So anyways, remember to retain those little areas like that and have this oscillation of light and dark within your scene. So what that means is, you know, as far as control goes, is that when you get to your darker areas, just don't go into those lighter areas too much, okay? You can kind of bring your lighter tones, you know, really close to these illuminated areas, but just when you get dark, just kind of stay on the outside. And here, if you've watched kind of some of these videos in sequence, I've talked about this lighting scheme, okay, of having kind of a darker area up top separated by, you know, this area of a little bit of darkness here, and then it comes out like this. It looks like an 8, doesn't it? You know, but that's what I do a lot of times in terms of my lighting scheme of a scene. And in your lighter areas within these two kind of spheres of lightness, you know, light source and reflected light, just retain some of the whiteness of your page, I would recommend. And even if it looks too stark white, you know, when it's all said and done, if you wanted to, you can go back in with some lighter tones, but that's better than just toning everything out, you know, all of the contrast out of there, you know, with your inks, okay? Because you can always go back in and add more ink. But it's always kind of hard to, you know what I mean, without doing some kind of bleaching technique or something like that, to remove ink off of the scene and to recover, you know, the lightness, the whiteness of your card. All right? So that would be my little tip for the day there. If you do this kind of in a, I don't know, doesn't have to be a stamp along, but if you do that kind of technique with the splatter painting. Now, if you do that splatter painting like up in, as stars, that's not necessarily supposed to be reflected light. That's supposed to be just stars, so you can make it as dark as you want to. Anyways, Dr. Martin's bleed proof white, an opaque white watercolor paint, and it's a lot of fun. All right, so if you watch this video, I hope you enjoy it. Okay, I thought I'd try to stamp out a scene here using a combination of stamps that I don't think I've used together before. I've used all of my stamps, of course, and most of them many, many times, but just with the sheer number of them and the number of potential compositions. There are quite a few stamps that I've just, I don't think that I've used in conjunction with one another before. I was thinking about a composition using this Cloud with Crescent Moon large, and I thought I would fill in underneath and maybe over the top with the Cloud Cumulus, and I thought I would put it over the smaller Seaside Cove stamp with these crashing waves in the foreground. And I don't know, we'll see what that what we come up with as far as kind of that as a structure. I really haven't thought of a color scheme yet, though, but I don't know, we'll think about that, or we'll think about that when the time comes. One of the things that I wanted to do too, kind of in building with previous videos, is I wanted to use some of that Dr. Martin's white, bleed-proof white again with a paintbrush. Did it on the startering paper, and that was quite a bit of fun. And I don't know, I'm kind of curious to see what type of brush work I can introduce to the scene. Using that bleed-proof white right here. As I stated in the previous video, I'm not a painter at all. But I think some freeform brush work might be kind of a nice addition as far as a potential texture to a scene. But we'll see. Okay, I'm just going to go about, well, I don't know, I guess it's a little bit less than 50% up the scene. A lot of surface area to this large stamp, so let's use a good amount of pressure. I wonder if that paper just stuck to that. Let's see how that goes. Oh, no, not bad. There's this tack and peel, and it's really tacky, and sometimes I put like a blank stamp up here, and I just don't ink it up just to provide some support, okay? You can go like this, just with a couple unmounted stamps and ink that up and then stamp it on down just so that sticky part of it that's exposed doesn't just stick like, glue to your paper. This isn't an adhesive or anything like this tack and peel. It's just this tacky thing, and it doesn't leave any residue or anything like that on your unmounted stamps. But keep in mind, I don't have a block tailor-made for like a really long stamp like this, so I have to use kind of my large one. Okay, and then always reintroduce your kind of that protective sheet to that, and it'll be protected from whatever might stick to it, on your table or whatnot. Alright, now I'm trying to decide on a color for this. I think I'm going to do, besides this composition, we'll do kind of weird color schemes. I did a scene like that, oh, I don't know, a few lessons ago. Let's go with purples on this one. How about, I don't know, gold and purple or something like that. Let's see here. This is a violet. Maybe that's too dark. Let's try. How about a pale violet? How about a pale violet, and if I have some other color, maybe I can introduce another color into this and blend it in, okay? I don't know, this might be too light. Let's think about, magenta, plum. Tell you what, here's kind of a navy blue. This isn't my Prussian blue, is it? Okay, that's kind of a navy blue. And let's see if we can't go for a little bit of variation and achieve kind of a more violet tone using just a number 9 Marvy pink, okay, brush marker. I'll just kind of streak some of this color into some of these clouds here. You can kind of see what color it's mixing to form in my little squiggle here. I don't worry about the color polluting the pen because I just kind of wipe it off like that, and it's pink again, basically. Especially with these big, fat marker type pens, you know, where they're, you know, it's pretty juicy, and you know, there's plenty of ink in it, so it's not absorbing too much of the ink. It's just kind of getting on the surface right here, but, you know, I just kind of wipe it off like that. Okay. I don't know if I wouldn't put, like, black on this and use, like, a yellow pen and do this, you know. But blue and pink, you know, they're kind of similar in terms of their origins and relationship. You can kind of blend them together just fine. All right, let's go for a little bit of what I call dramatic balance. I'm going to try to center that moon. Doesn't mean you have to. You can go with the, you know, rule of thirds or whatever type of thing you want to do. All right, but here we have that variation in there. You see that the clouds, that blue and violet now. It's because I used the pink. It doesn't look pink because pink and blue mix to form, you know, that violet. So, all right, let's do the same type of thing. Let's use the same stamp. Okay, I'm going to use this side of it right here on over to fill in that, you know, that other area. I don't want another moon in there. I just want to use the cloud structures. All right. Okay, I'm just going to go in here and I'll overlap about a 1/4 inch or so. Maybe more. Maybe it's closer to a 1/2 inch. Somewhere in between a 1/4 and a 1/2 inch or so into the previous impression, okay? The previous cloud with a crescent moon image. Okay. So we have something like that. See, it's nice and seamless. It blends in, you know, perfectly with the with itself. Let me see. I could probably almost go for another impression or two. Let's just do that. I could use the cloud cumulus, and that would work just fine as well, but let's just use this cloud and from the cloud with crescent moon. Okay. Alright, now, like I said, I don't want another moon in there, so I'm not going to stamp it too low, but go about, let's go about like right here. See, I'm kind of putting this off center, okay, so that cloud doesn't line up exactly right over the top of this one, you know, in terms of the next impression of it. You know, oh, I got some cloud up, I mean the moon up there. Don't worry, that's going to be a kind of in a dark area. Alright. another one. See, I'm just kind of filling up the area. That area is going to be real dark up there, so I'm not worried about that. I'm trying to think if I can get... I don't know if I can get that cloud in there without getting the top of that moon. Well, maybe I can. Let's just try. And if I do get some of it in there, I'll just kind of make it obscure with the use of some tone. Okay. I'm looking at this right now. I'm trying to think, okay, I might need to mask that off a little bit. It's either that or let's really take off some of that ink off of the rubber. Okay, I was just going to stamp it right on in there, but I don't want that getting stamped up there too much. I want them to run into each other, but not by a lot. I'll show you what I mean by that. It means I've inked up kind of the bottom portion down here, but this still has some ink on it, right? I haven't cleaned the stamp off or anything like that, so I'm going to clean it off right now, like this. I'm doing this with a wet paper towel because, you know, I want that ink to be completely off there. I don't want any of this up here to be kind of ghost stamping into my, you know, that nice white area of the moon or something like that. Okay. Alright, that should be good. So, let's see where I should put this. Go about like so. Okay. Here, it looks like that. And we have this little area here. Why don't we get a little bit more texture in that spot? Okay, so I've inked up this little section right here. Let's take that paper towel and wipe off some of that again. Hit this area like this. Come on down. So we have that whole area filled in with texture. It looks like a cartoon sky or something like that, doesn't it? When it's filled in. I don't think I've filled in a whole big area just by using the clouds off this one. I usually fill in with filler stamp like that. Cloud cumulus, but as I've stated in other videos before, it's always kind of nice to be able to sit down at your desk and over the course of however long it takes you to create something, it's nice to see something new continuously. Now, I might revisit some compositions that I've done before, but it's always kind of interesting to see something really completely new. In terms of, could be anything, color scheme, a technique, a composition, whatever. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it works out better than others, you know, just in terms of the end result. But I always learn from, or I always try to learn from whatever I do, and if something doesn't come out really kind of how I want, you know, I hoped, or would hope that something would come out. If it doesn't, it's not really a big deal, because usually, if something doesn't come out, kind of to my satisfaction, I would say, and just in terms of the end visual, I always learn something from those times. Sometimes you learn even more from those types of experiences, you know, just in terms of a technique or something like that. And then those types of things you can kind of employ in your next scene or whatever, or you can avoid something too. But for the most part, they're all really fun to do. Okay, now this is the Rocks and Waves stamp, and I'm gonna have these kind of crashing here in the foreground. Trying to figure out where I want to do this. So do I want to do it a little bit higher? Maybe a little bit higher. I'm going to tilt it a little bit. Okay, and why don't I go for one more? It's kind of like waves are rolling in, crashing on the rocks. Okay. And something like that. Alright, so as I always say, you really don't need to mask very much using these stamps at all. You know, occasionally you'll see me cover up something with a paper towel, but you know, for the most part, you know, it's pretty free-form stamping. You know, some people feel real comfortable using positioners or something like that, or maybe more confident, which is fine, but I would say that if you do that, also give it a try, you know, give it a try to just kind of free stamping it, you know, and get real free with it, overlap things. Sometimes the process could be really nice and fluid when you kind of approach it in that manner. Okay, now let's see, we have kind of our foundation set here, don't we? And the one place where I don't have any texture right now, and I can add it in now or whenever. I was thinking about some of these rocks down here in the foreground. Maybe I'll do them in like a blue or something of that sort. I'm finding that kind of I've always known the importance of texture and how it plays into kind of a lot of what I'm doing in scenes, but I didn't really consciously think of texture as a kind of not a replacement, but kind of a compensator for hue and value and whatnot. If I'm doing kind of a more limited tonal range or value range in a given scene, I'm finding that kind of texture can really do even more than I thought it could of late with some of the scenes that I've been doing. Okay, that's about 3 impressions with that tiny rock stamp. It's like one of my favorite stamp designs. That one and the smaller version. A lot of these stamps that kind of get a lot of play in my scenes are kind of these visually kind of, I don't know, maybe boring ones, you know, like this stamp right here, this little tiny rocks, but sometimes the most kind of generic types of designs, a lot of them are things like textures. They can really play a pretty important role just in terms of, you know, how they're used in terms of kind of their role in terms of being a filler stamp. You know, there's a lot of areas that kind of tie scenes together, you know. They bridge the kind of space in between other designs a lot of times. And that's things like textures, like, so that's what these kind of rocks do. You know, they kind of fill in the gaps. Like over here, there was a little bit of an empty space, and over here, and doing that, you know, visually it ties the two areas together. And then the sky is a certain color. I can do this, you know, in similar tones and hue, just to kind of create that kind of relationship between the two different areas. And they don't play a big role, you know, in the end result. You know, I don't think people look at it and say, oh my gosh, what a great, you know, scene of rocks or something like that. It's definitely kind of, you know, secondary in terms of the attention that it demands or whatever. All right, now let's get to the toning of this scene. Things that I'm trying to think of right now are what colors do I want to use in here? We already kind of established this violet type of kind of lighting scheme. I think we should go with something of that sort. We can go with these types of colors. This is Caribbean blue. I don't know. We can lay down some memento colors as well. Let's just start off with a little bit of re-inker fluid, okay? Because this is a fairly large scene. Just for the sake of this video, especially, I want to expedite the process a little bit. So sometimes using just re-inker fluid from one of your, you know, pads. Especially if it's kind of a lighter value of whatever color scheme you're going with. In this case, it's blue or pink. You can do in a violet scene, pale violet too. You know, it's just something really light. If you have a re-inker fluid and just kind of ink up your sponge applicator, it'll really, you know, cover a lot of ground. All right. Now that being said, it doesn't mean you want to tone out everything. Like this moon in here, I want that moon to stand out nice and light, okay? So what I have to do is I have to make the area around it darker. Okay, but maybe I do want some of those clouds to be kind of reflecting some of that light as reflected light, okay? Which means just don't tone everything out. Leave a few things lit, okay? And sometimes it's hard to do if you have a lot of ink in your applicator because it gets so much coverage, okay? You can spread it around all over the place. Alright, I just looked at my camera battery and I didn't switch out my battery before I started recording this, so let me quickly do a battery change here. Alright, back. We're talking about lighting, source of light, reflected light down here, okay? So, I'm going to be careful not to just tone everything out, okay? I do, yeah, this is a fairly light color that I'm working with now. It's the aqua of the Adirondack Lights variety. A similar one would be a Memento Summer Sky. I don't have a re-inker fluid for any of the mementos, though. I'm assuming they have them. That would be an excellent one to do this with. If Memento does make re-inkers, that would be an excellent one to get. I use my light blue tones all the time. Okay, splashing, crashing waves. I like to have some of those waves illuminated. I don't want them just stark white. That's just too white for me. So I am putting some tone down here, but maybe on the top surfaces of some of these where it's really kind of splashing. You know, maybe I'll leave some of that, you know, just the white of the card. Okay, this Seaside Cove has this kind of a cresting wave where you see that kind of foam, you know, coming off the top, or some spray off the top. They call it spindrift. I'm leaving some of that spindrift a little bit lighter, okay? Just so, you know, because white reflects light, you know, just like snow or something like that reflects, you know, sunlight more than, you know, like earth or something like that, dirt. All right, but this, like I said, this is a light, you know, a really light color, so I do want to get a pretty good amount of coverage with it, okay? Now, when I get darker, I don't go into my scene quite as much. So that being said, with your lighter colors, do go in, you know, pretty decent amount of the way. Maybe don't tone out all of your light, though. See, this moon is nice and white still. But sometimes, okay, sometimes that's almost too light. So sometimes I'll put a streak of some tone across it, but with my lighter color, okay? But I won't do that with my darker colors most of the time. Okay, that was the aqua. Let's try a Caribbean blue. If you had like a Memento Bahama blue, that would be perfect to use too. Okay, this Caribbean blue, I'm becoming quite a fan of that. There's a little bit of yellow or green to it. So it's a little bit of a warmer blue, but not so much that it's like a turquoise or something. Not that turquoise is bad, but in this scene, I don't want to go so warm with a blue because I have my other violets to, you know, to bring into the scene. Okay, that should do that. See that? Your lightest color gets the most amount of coverage. See, with this one, I don't know, that was probably a minute or so with that color up there in that sky area. And I am working the sky area, okay? I'm working areas. I'm not trying to get that whole thing, you know, this whole card done instantly. I just work a small area at a time. Now I'm working in the water, okay? And toning in. Work on your other side, just flip it around. Okay. Watch out for your spindrift. If you've avoided a certain area with a lighter color, I would do the same with the darker color, so kind of being careful around that spindrift. Okay, now I'm coming into some of these waves over here because I usually like, you know, my personal preferences. I like to kind of create a little bit of a vignette around my scenes. So I make the edges darker, okay? So I am coming into those waves a little bit with that thing. Everything doesn't have to be illuminated, you know, evenly. You can make certain areas darker than others. And I'm saying that because of what I'm saying is, you know, let's say we have some of these crashing waves and that foam illuminated. Well, everything doesn't have to be, you know, lit up the exact same way, you know. You can have some areas in shadows if you want to, for example. You know, there's clouds up here, so, It stand to reason that, you know, there's certain areas that are a little bit more illuminated than others because you know, some clouds are obscuring some areas, some of the land below, you know, from the light, from cast light. Now sometimes, well, a lot of times actually, when I'm doing the Seaside Cove, I like to do a little masking. I like to, see, this is the same, there's shadows down here, right? You know, on the horizon. But what I like to do sometimes is reiterate my shadow areas. So what I'm going to do is I'm just taking a piece of paper. I'm going to mask off that Seaside Cove. That's the easiest mask you'll ever do, you know. It's just a straight line, you know. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a little bit of a tonal separation between that water and my sky, okay? Kind of going into my areas underneath some of these waves and increasing the contrast. Okay, but let's get back to this masked area. Mask off like that just to create a stronger separation. So what I've done, you'll hear me say this a lot in these videos, but I'm reiterating what's going on in the design. I'm just, you know, deepening the shadows, you know, with some additional value in these areas right there. Now we'll keep doing that too as we get through some darker tones. When do you know to move on to your next color? Well, when we've achieved a full saturation in the darkest areas with a given color. So the more I add down here, you know, it's the exact same thing. So that's when I know if I want to go darker, I'll need to switch pads as opposed to just, you know, having more ink laid down in some area. Okay. So switching up, I don't know if this pad will do anything. It's the light blue. It might be a little bit darker than the Caribbean blue. Yeah, I think it's a little bit darker. Increasing the shadows a little bit more each time so that my waves kind of stand out a little bit more. Okay, they won't stand out more though if you just tone them all out. So it's kind of important to retain some of that contrast in there. Okay, and like I said, it is all in the design. If you see kind of a dark area in the design, just make it a little bit darker with your ink. Okay, adding it up into the sky. Alright, so this scene has a lot of texture and pattern which is not a bad thing, okay? But for my eye, to my eye, it looks really, really busy, okay? And it's okay to be busy, you know, but usually I don't want the entire scene just to kind of as a textural kind of a, I don't know, monopoly or something like that. I want certain areas to be textural and, you know, with pattern, but I want contrasts in there. I want, you know, things to be kind of balanced, you know, so that we have areas in which, you know, there's a lot going on from a textural standpoint, objects, color, whatever. But there are certain areas that I just don't want to have so much going on, you know, so that, you know, the viewer's eye just never has a chance to rest. So all I'm saying, what I'm getting at here is I'm just going to darken it. I'm going to subdue some of that contrast and texture and pattern in some areas, so that the areas that kind of still stand out like that, all right, the light areas, those areas will be just that much more effective, okay? It's like in music or something like that, you know. Sometimes, what is that saying? Music is the space between the notes. It's the silence, you know, that plays an integral part of, you know, a given composition. So what we have in these scenes, what I try to do is I try to create some areas that there's just not a lot going on. You know, it's kind of darker, there's less contrast, there's, you know, kind of minimal texture. Just so not, everything isn't all the same. That's just the same thing with the light and the dark in here. You know, there's an interplay of that going on. And the same can be said for things like texture, okay? So you just keep darkening the areas around it, and kind of the more busier things will be going on in the illuminated portions of the scene, okay? So you can say the shadows are kind of like a role player, you know, to make a different analogy. You know, and the lit areas are the star. It's like there are certain areas that are just kind of in the spotlight. It's kind of creating a situation where, you know, you're directing your viewer's eye to whatever it is in the scene that you think is the most important. Alright, so this is blue. It's kind of a navy blue, pretty dark blue. Okay, looks like I can get a little bit darker just by using more ink, so that's what I'm doing here. I'm kind of tapping instead of swiping, and that's building up more ink in those areas. Sometimes you get to a certain level of ink saturation, and if you kind of swipe like that, it's kind of removing ink off your page. So sometimes you have to kind of let it build up a little bit, you know, like this. And what I'm not, you know, tapping this real hard or anything like that. I'm tapping harder the drier this gets, but not when it's, you know, freshly inked. I don't need to, you know, tap it too hard. So I'm just kind of building that up, like so, all right? And we have a nice, deep, rich, degree of saturation with that going on. All right, that's that. What I should do is I should turn my blotter paper in the configuration of this card. All right, let's go with the Prussian blue. Prussian blue is a very, very dark, deep value of blue, and it's very rich. And I just know it's going to kind of go into the paper very quickly because it's also a very thin ink in terms of the thickness of it. Okay, let's go back to our mask here. I have to be careful with my real dark tones that I don't go and just tone everything out, with it, okay? It stays a lot more moist on your tip because you're adding it to the to kind of a wet surface, so it's the ink isn't coming off the tip as fast either. Now, like I said, with the Prussian blue, it kind of penetrates the card pretty quickly, the cardstock, so it does go on, relatively quick, but the page is still, fairly saturated. It's like super saturated, almost. Maybe not so super saturated, but getting there, like I said. Okay. I can go on here, and I will with some alcohol inks just to get a little bit more tone into them, into the kind of harder to reach areas, but I'm going to get as much as I can just with the stylus tool, foam tips on this. If you haven't seen these videos before, this is called a stylus tool. Not stylist, with a T at the end, stylus. Just the S at the end. That's what they call it. Alright, that is the Prussian blue. It's pretty dark, alright? But not dark enough. So that's when I go back to black, okay? Black is what I stamped out my darkest imagery in. So I'm going to finish the toning process with that same value and hue as it should hopefully kind of unify things, okay, with a common value and hue. I'll do it when I do it on one side so you can kind of compare, contrast with the other side. And remember, I'm kind of applying this ink into kind of a wet page, so it's not Prussian blues kind of goes on faster at this point in time, but this black is a little bit thicker probably, so I'm not quite mopping off all my color just because of how wet the cardstock is now, but it is kind of coming off a little bit, which isn't a bad thing, you know. Okay, so you can see the difference between that side and this side, okay? Let's approach the other side. Okay, just a nice light touch. See, over the top of it, I'm kind of making a longer stroke because I'm kind of closing off the top portion, but around on the sides, I don't need to come in quite so far. Now don't worry about dark areas, okay, of your scene. They're not just there to make the card dark. In a scene like this, where, you know, we have a light source and reflected light, if you make these areas a little bit darker out there, it'll make these areas lighter by contrast, visually, you know. Visually by contrast, okay? You put something dark next to something light, it'll make that lighter thing seem even more light, okay? Okay. There's our nice horizon line, just made by a sheet of paper like that. So it allows me to come in straight over from the edge like that. Okay, let's see if we can get some of this black underneath some of that spindrift. What I'm doing is I'm just making short strokes like this on the edge of my sponge tip, okay? Stylus tip. Alright, adding some down into the bottom left and right corners. One of the things that's kind of going through my mind during this scene as it builds is I'm wondering if I want to do any of that kind of splatter painting right around those crashing waves. It would certainly be, you know, conducive, you know, to that technique. Well, I think I'm going to do that since I'm going to use that opaque white anyway. Okay. Is that moon bothering anyone? You know what it is? It needs another hue in here, okay? Let's create somewhat of a related hue in that area in the form of some I think that tip's clean. Let's do kind of a greenish tinge. Okay, I'll go with a pale green right here. It's kind of a sea foamy green. If you don't have something like that, you can go with a darker green if you want to, but what you do is you just really blot it off quite a bit, okay, before you take it in there. Or get some water in your tip right here. Don't have it sopping wet, you know, get some moisture and get a little bit of green in there, and then just kind of blot it around. You'll have a pale version of whatever green you're working with, and you can use that. Test it out, you know, always kind of test it out on a, you know, piece of blotter paper or whatever. See what color you're going to be working with if you do something like that. Okay, I'm just going and adding a little bit of this greenish tinge to that moon. I'll put a little bit on some of these clouds as well, where they're kind of reflecting some of that color. I'll put some of this down in the water as well, just a little hint of that tone. I think a little hint, maybe bigger. I think I'd like that green. It needed something warm like that, I think. See how it's really warming up that water? And I just put a little bit on that moon here. Let me put a little bit more. Okay, that's bringing some of these areas to life a little bit. One of the things I mentioned in another video is little tweaks that you can add to a given scene, and just by kind of extending the range of hue in a certain area. Okay, so if it's just blue, what I'm doing is I'm introducing green into it, even though it's one more color only. I mean, there's various values of blue in there, but if I add green in there, what you're doing is you're basically doubling the amount of hue in that area, right? You know, if there's only one there, blue, and then you add green to it, so you've doubled kind of the color range of a given space. Okay, so that helped, I think. There's a little bit more of a glowing type of feel to that area. Okay, and of course green relates to blue, you know. Blue is in green. And I have that violet up there, but greens go well with violets. Purple and green. You know, it's like that Halloween color scheme, you know. Used to be orange and black, now it's like purples and kind of that lime green looking color. Alright, so kind of purples and greens and blues, you know, it's kind of a strange, weird color scheme in some ways, but they're fun to work with. Alright, now let's see what we can do here. Alright, one thing that I've been saving for this moment, if I can find it, is my little subject matter. I have this little fishing boat here. And I'm going to stamp that right in here. I'm doing some test impressions first because this is a brand new stamp, and what I'm doing is sometimes brand new stamps have a little bit of the resist, you know, from the vulcanizing process, which is what it's called when they press rubber, and there might be a little bit of resist on it, not too much. I mean, a lot of times I can just rub it off my finger, but you know, kind of to get your stamps nice and kind of ready to accept ink, kind of rub them a little bit, you know. You can do it with your finger or whatever, or on just on a piece of paper, and it gets the stamps kind of ready, more so than, you know, never been inked. All right, let's see here. Trying to think if I want any additional imagery in here. The reeds would look okay, but all right, let's not do that right now. All right, I wasn't really planning on doing that splatter painting, but like I say in these videos, you know, sometimes there's things come up, a notion or whatever during the process, and you know, I don't necessarily know where these scenes are going from the beginning, or I don't know, some of you might, but I don't. And let's see, where's my toothbrush? I need my splatter painting toothbrush. I just washed it out. Maybe I left it over in the sink. Okay, I have my toothbrush here. It's just a old toothbrush. I have no idea what softness of bristles it is or anything like that. Probably medium or something like that. And I have my Dr. Martin's bleed proof white. That, okay. And it's an opaque watercolor. And what I've done is I've just squirted some little water in here, and I've mixed it up a little bit because this jar can get a little bit dry. So you just kind of reconstitute it with a little bit of water when you're ready to use it. You don't want it too thin. Just, it's kind of, you're going for just the right consistency. It's like I forgot what I compared it to in the previous videos. I should remember that. It's like maybe kind of a little bit thinner than Elmer's glue. You can get it like to Elmer's glue consistency or something like that. Alright, now, we have all these splashing waves down here, right? Look at that nice glow that green provided, okay? Now, this will kind of make sense in terms of a reflected light if you put like little white splashes up here, but you have to kind of retain that, some areas of light in the scene, okay? Because when I splatter paint this, it's going to represent these little, you know, splashing bits of, water being illuminated by, you know, a white light, because this is, you know, this bleed-proof white is white. So I'll state that in the kind of the intro to this video, just so people kind of remember to retain some of these areas if you kind of do end up doing this scene. Okay, and I'm just going in, and I wouldn't call this a, you know, like a real controlled technique, because I don't know when like a blob of paint is going to come out. Not a big blob like I had like in my last scene, but I'm talking about just the variation that occurs, you know, when you start splattering that everywhere. You see what I'm looking at. See that right there? But see on the wave, you know, it kind of makes for a dramatic look. And it's just really fun to kind of do that type of thing in a scene as far as the technique goes. I mean, you know. When does, you know, splatter painting, you know, when do we really use that as a technique? You know, not much. I know, I guess I look for excuses to do that type of thing, but you know, I don't know. I don't do it that often. A lot of times I even forget about it for a while. And I'll do it and then I'll think, oh man, that was really fun. In a way, I don't know, I guess the way this paint looks, there's something maybe about the randomness of the, or the variation of that splatter that looks a little bit more natural than laying down each dot, say, with a gel pen or something, you know? Because I do kind of get different sizes of that little splatter. A lot of it's like a fine mist, and then occasionally I'll get like a larger, whatever, splatter of a ball of paint, I guess. Okay, let's see. This is what it's looking like now. Oops. Here we go. So that action right there, that's really fun. Around there, here. Right here, it looks pretty good. Some of it's a little bit too fine, I think, but that's just the nature of it. You can't really control everything, you know, this too much. I'm going to try to get this in some of these ways back in here if I can. I don't want too much of it everywhere, though. This is where it's really, I can't really control it. I think I've used a little paintbrush before, and maybe that worked too, in conjunction with something like this. Okay. And this is what your thumb looks like after. All right. Kind of, we've increased the textural range of the scene. For sure, you know, with all that splattering going on down there. All right, now to follow up, I have my white gel pen. I always say white paint pen. Used to use these white paint pens before. But I'm going to go in and add a few effects using the white gel pen. There's certain things that just I can't really do with with like a splattering toothbrush, you know, paint flying off the end of it. So what I'm going to do is come into it with this pen here. And I'm just kind of reiterating again what's going on in the design. There's some areas in here that are lighter on the design, and where I kind of toned them out just because there wasn't any way of avoiding that, I'm just going to go back in and add, that lightness back into those areas. Maybe not everywhere, but in a few areas for sure. And that's, again, if I retained the white of the card in some of those areas, it means that kind of white light is hitting it. And we have this area of reflected light in those waves. Okay, so that's what it looks like up close, and when you're looking at an arm's distance, it looks like that. I feel it makes those waves look a little bit more dimensional, right? We've hit darker in the shadows, and we've hit lighter in the highlights, okay? All right, now one of the things I was kind of curious about was the use of a paintbrush. All right, I keep losing all my equipment here. I had everything kind of, I thought, ready to go on this one, but now I can't find my paintbrush. That's what happens when we start doing these scenes, right? Or any kind of craft is we start losing things that are right in front of our face. All right, I need to go. Okay, that was easy. It was right next to me, but kind of hidden behind a pen. All right, one of the things I wanted to try was my hand at kind of free form I guess this is, well, I guess it's painting, but kind of some brush work. I thought I might be able to get some different types of looks with this. This is using the bleed proof white again, and let's try this out. Okay. And you just kind of go in and illuminate some areas in here. And I'm starting off just with some areas that are already illuminated, but like I said, I might have gone over it a little bit with some tone, okay, because it was unavoidable, but now I can go back in maybe in a nice maybe I was going to say graceful stroke, but maybe just not quite as clunky as it could potentially be with me doing it. Not too bad. Yeah, let me see if I can show you what I'm going for. See, kind of in these illuminated, lit areas of the kind of the cloud lining. Okay, I'm kind of going into it like that and just adding a little streak like that, where it's a little bit thinner, it's a little bit more translucent, okay? Alright, now same thing down here in the waves. Maybe I can add a few little highlights in here. Yeah, I can add it in a nice thin stroke. Which is, you know, just that's not something that a ballpoint pen is kind of designed for. You know, ballpoint pen is not designed for variation, so yeah, this is working out pretty good in terms of my intended use. We'll see how it looks in the end, and if it'll be kind of something that I kind of add to my repertoire, you know, of techniques. I do like the variation. Let's do it up here. Let's see if we can kind of add kind of a little shimmery surface by adding a little stroke like that. Okay. Alright, I'm getting some more paint, which you can't see off screen here. Because it dries fairly quickly on the page, so it's drying on my brush, you know, quickly as well. Alright, let's see. Okay, that's okay. You can't really see it too much because I'm staying in the lighter area here, but if I kind of streak it into that green area, I think it'll be more visible. Right now it's very subtle because that stroke is in the light area. But I'll come out here into the darker areas as well. Kind of trail it off a little bit. Okay, so what we have is this right here. Kind of like these areas like that. Let's do the same thing over here. Alright, I'm getting a little bit more comfortable with it, so I'm being a little bit more free in terms of my applications of it. Alright, so this is what we're doing right here. I'm kind of doing these horizontal little bits, you know, see back in here, that. And I will say that it's really fun. If you know me, I like a lot of detail and subtleties, you know, kind of going on in a given scene. So I like to be able to add these types of marks into the scene. Alright, let's look at this area down here. There's a lot of kind of action going down there. Let's see if I can add a little bit of variation, just so there's not kind of a monotonous kind of texturing going on down here. So I can kind of add in some, you know, little or I guess not little, they're larger kind of splashes, you know. Because what I don't know, sometimes I get a lot more variation, but sometimes I don't. Sometimes it's just, maybe it's the consistency of the paint. This time it was all nice and real fine, you know, like a spray. And sometimes it's a little bit more varied. So, if I don't get the variation within kind of the splatter painting technique, I just get that, I can always go back in and just add these larger splashes in a very controlled manner. Let's see. There's a little bit more variation, like those big balls of white over there. Looks like I can use some right in here and here, huh? It's kind of monotonous in those areas. Okay. Yeah. I'm going to add some texturing to that moon. I'm going to actually add in a few little craters, I think. They're not going to be real obvious or anything, but, you know, just... Again, those little subtle things that are going on. And I like to kind of break up that green streak across there too a little bit. I like the green, but I don't like some of that, I don't know, part of that texture maybe. So, oops. Just put in a little bit in the base of that moon. Okay, so we have that variation down here. So those touches up here. And get really thin, being that I'm using a, you know, brush, thin brush. I don't know if I'll do this little brush technique, you know, in a large amount of my scenes in the future, but I have a feeling it's going to play a part, or at least a little role. There's just a lot of control that you can get with that brush, you know, in terms of, you know, just a little thin mark with it, so, I don't know. It's a pretty powerful tool to have, you know, in terms of when you're talking about texture, value, and control over that. Okay, let's see what we have here. There's a lot of texture. There's a lot of action going on down here especially. I like what's going on down there. Right here. Okay. But there's too much of it. There's too much of it right in our face. You know, because what it is it's the closest thing to our eye, okay? So, that being said, if we go back to that video of mine where we talk about, you know, adding an extra color to something, extra texture, foreground elements. I'm going to do that now. And I'm going to use my VersaFine pad. It doesn't dry real fast on this, okay? I'm going to have to let it sit for a while, but this is the last thing that I'm going to be doing on this scene, so it doesn't matter, you know. I can let it sit, you know, and then I'll spray it in the end with a Krylon, you know, crystal clear or something of that sort. All right. So the VersaFine is a pigment ink, and it's called Instant Dry Pigment Ink, but it doesn't instant dry from what I found on glossy cardstock. Okay. It dries more, you know, quicker on probably matte cardstock or something of that sort. Okay, this is my reed stamp. What I'm doing is I'm adding the reeds, and they'll be in my foreground, okay? So what we've done is we've pushed our rocks, crashing rocks and waves further, you know, farther back visually. And as busy as they are, okay, they'll be toned down a little bit by that foreground element now. Okay, see that? And that looks pretty good, I guess. I don't know, I'm trying to think if I want to add anything else to this. I think this is going to be a matter of, since I have those reeds down there kind of dry, and I'm going to let this sit for a while, and I'm going to come back to it. What I'm wondering about is if I should add anything kind of in the sky area, like a branch coming in from overhead or something like that, like we're standing underneath a tree. Or if I want to do something else in these areas. I think some other things could potentially work. Maybe some extra texture in the form of the gel pen or something like that on the clouds. But I don't know. I'm going to let this sit, and I'm going to come back to it and look at it with some fresh eyes and see how it looks to me then. Okay, I am back, and looking at this scene, I think what it needs is it just needs some additional texture. It's so, you know, textural down here in the lower half. And we just need to match up, not an equivalent amount of texture, but we need some in the top area, just because it's just not balanced in terms of the texture that we see in those crashing waves and on the water's surface and whatnot. Now, I'm going to go in and add a little bit of highlighting around on my clouds, okay? And I'm going to let the moon kind of be the illuminating source, of course, up there. So just on some of these areas that are facing that moon, I'll add these little highlights into those areas, okay? We'll see how it looks. No idea what it's going to look like. interesting thing that's happened to this pen here is I think some of that paint got into that barrel, so I'm getting kind of a smaller dot than I normally do. Okay, maybe now I don't know, I rolled it, so maybe it's coming out a little bit faster. But I was going to say it's not bad, because I wouldn't mind having a kind of a smaller dot. Yeah, I don't know. It seems varied, so maybe that's good. I'm able to get kind of a small dot and a larger dot. Now it's fairly dark up here in the sky, so I'm not going to add too much, too many highlights. But just around, see, right around here, up in here are the clouds, and some areas down here. I kind of taper it off a little bit as it moves into the darkness. In the darkness, you just wouldn't have as many highlights as in the lighter areas where you have more light hitting that object, or cloud in this case. Okay. Oh. I almost forgot about some pens. Okay. I can kind of add in some streaks of color here and there. These are, this is an alcohol pen. It's a Le Plume Permanent. A lot of other alcohol-based markers out there that you can use as well. Or water-based markers like a Le Plume or a Tombow. That sort of thing. Okay, and I just used a very light blue, and this one's kind of a medium blue. This one's cyan. Going in some of the shadows down here. Okay. Alright. Let's see, there's a lot of paint down here, so that I might be picking up some of that paint in this roller pen. Roller ball again. But let's see what happens. Yeah. That paint kind of gets into my gel pen a little bit. It starts to clog it up, so... I'm talking about the bleed proof, why it is getting in there a little bit. Try to avoid some of the thicker, splattery areas. Okay. A little more texture down here, a little more shadows and whatnot. Where that fishing boat is, we have the illumination coming from there, so why don't I add some shadow. Something like that. And then maybe I'll kind of blend it out a little bit with a lighter blue. So, okay. Kind of anchored it down a little bit with that shadow there. That was another one of those things in that video that I talk about in terms of kind of pushing the scene forward a little bit more, you know, with the use of some shadows. This is a really dark blue here. It's almost too dark, but I'll add it in a couple areas. Just to deepen the shadows just a touch. All right, there we have it. Kind of a crescent moon over the crescent moon in the waves or something like that. It was a fun scene to do. This is a large scene, and playing around with that area there kind of taught me something about the crescent moon surrounding clouds and just how you can kind of fill in with that same cloud on there just several times, and it went in pretty seamlessly. The Seaside Cove, small. And then there's this transition area here with some crashing waves. That texture down there is a lot of fun to do, just in terms of that splatter paint. But what I do, it's a lot of fun to add that in, you know, kind of, you know, with this thing and splattering it down, getting that texture. I tend to get a little bit carried away with it, though. And I add in a lot. If you add in way too much of it sometimes too, what you can just do is you can wait for it to dry and just take a paper towel and, you know, just wipe it right off, and it comes off. You can kind of buff it off, and it, you know, works okay. But what I did was I just kind of obscured it a little bit with these reeds in here. So, anyways, it's kind of a fun scene. I don't know. I just kind of wanted to play around with some things, and I was just looking at some different imagery and. Kind of felt like playing around with a lot of texture, and I just wanted an excuse to use that kind of that toothbrush in the bleed-proof white again after that last scene. So I don't know, it's just a lot of fun to do. You know, it's all about kind of textures for me a lot of times with the scenes. It's about visuals, but as far as like a visual kinesthetic, you know, feel, it's about kind of the visual textures that go on within a scene and the contrast. I don't really have a lot of soft things in here, you know, that I can maybe achieve with a little bit of pigment ink or something like that and a Q-tip, but I think I'm just going to leave it at that because I kind of got my fix of the splatter painting for tonight. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed watching this scene, and if you stamped along with me as a stamp along, I don't know, it's kind of a complex structure, relatively speaking, just because it's a large scene and whatnot, but if you did, I hope you had a great time and had as much fun as I did. Thanks so much for watching.